This is Kimberly Rice, and you are tuned into the Secret Sauce Marketing Tasting Show, the groundbreaking podcast for business bosses, professional women, and anyone who is hungry to learn how to create the career, business, and life of their dreams by charting their own course. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kimberly Rice from KLA Marketing Associates for another episode of Secret Sauce Marketing Tastings. This week, we are featuring the none other than the amazing Julie Kratz, hailing from the Midwest as she's CEO of Pivot Point, and we're so excited to have her here today. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks so much for having me, Kimberly.
So today, we're speaking about how women in the workplace can develop a compelling work situation, a winning career game plan to address some of the issues that we know exist that are getting a lot of press around gender inequality, implicit bias, those things that have been in existence for as long as there have been two genders in the workplace, but have never really been called out. This year, in the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months, they've been talked about. They've been all over the news. But as women in the workplace, both Julie and I have experienced them firsthand before we started our own business. So we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But immediately at the top of our show, I want to give our listeners an opportunity for Julie to talk a little bit about herself, her professional passion, her company Pivot Point, and a few insights into her professional journey.
Yeah, thanks for that opportunity. Yeah, like you said, I did the corporate thing for a dozen or so years. So I spent my time, I paid my dues in corporate America, and Pivot Point's the name of my business now. I started that 5 years ago, but I affectionately had, these pivot points, these career shifts in my corporate experience where I tried on a different role. I moved into a different functional area, many different industries, went back to school, got my MBA. So there were kind of all these pivots that I had. The common thread through it, though, really was leadership. I was almost always a people leader at a very early age. Got to learn in the trenches, and I still think that's one of the most challenging jobs I had is managing, a team of 60 people when you're 23 years old. It's like, holy smokes.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah.
But fast forward to today, and I get to support leaders, and I often say, especially for women, you don't have to learn it the hard way. Here's some tools that really work. And I think we're at a time of a real reckoning in this country. The last 18 months with Me Too and political and social messaging happening, we're having a wake up call of this behavior is not okay, and we need to be more inclusive of women at work. And there's new standards being formed. And we're also at a point where men are getting very uncomfortable. New data just came out from Lean In that suggests that 60% of men are now uncomfortable meeting with women one-on-one at work. This isn't, outside of work. This is at work, and that's not okay.
No.
It's actually worse than a year ago. It's 50%. So it's getting worse before it gets better. And so that data really is disheartening for me because I'm a big fan of bringing men into the conversation as allies, and they can be very helpful as mentors, sponsors, advocates for us. And what this data suggests is that actually we have fewer allies available to us. So that's my life's work. It's a little setback before we move forward, but that really why I do what I do is I've always had a burning passion for supporting women, helping women in the workplace, raised by a single mom, had a series of my own setbacks in corporate, but I didn't even know what was happening at the time. And so I think it's these little chinks in the armor that women today experience in the workplace. And sometimes much more than a chink, if you think about Me Too and some of the egregious things that can happen to women. But more often, it's these subtle little things, these subtle little signals you don't belong, that our work is really dedicated to. How do we promote a sense of belonging where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued in the workplace, especially when nearly every industry is male dominated. So that's what I do, why I do it. It's going to be fun. 2020 is a big year. Think about women's suffrage, 100th anniversary. And this is actually primarily for white women. Women of color really didn't have access to voting until the 1960s, which is just something new that I learned about. So having a passion to really rally all women together so that we can celebrate, this accomplishment 100 years in is going to be interesting. So we're working on some new programs I'll get to later in the podcast about, hindsight's 2020, the year 2020. So it's a really interesting point to look backwards, to look forward. So I could just talk about this stuff all day.
And I think it really adds to, and I find this very fascinating, I think it really adds to the mission and the purpose and the drive. I guess that's the word I'm looking for, the drive for women like ourselves, because we've been, I sometimes say, inside, and we've done the quote corporate thing, and we've
Mm-hmm.
lived it, right?
Yeah.
We've lived it, and there are people who have paved the way before us, and I can only imagine what it was like then. I mean, I know some anecdotally and research wise, and we've paved the way for others. However, it is extremely disheartening when you think about Gloria Steinem, way
Mm-hmm.
back when, and her entire life's work. And here we are today, with men going to prison because of bad behavior. Um,
Yep.
and, so I guess I say that to say that as much progress that has been made, perhaps historically, it is so still egregiously unacceptable for how women are treated in the workplace, that
Mm-hmm.
I know when I speak about client firms that I've worked with, that we've worked with here, coaching women through very difficult situations in the professional services arena. I often am met with quizzical looks from other women, older women usually, and men. It's like, wow, is that still going on? I would have.
Yeah.
I'm like, you have no idea.
You can't see what you can't see, right? If
Right.
you're not being treated that way, I think a lot for our male colleagues, the Me Too movement was a real wake up call, because what a lot of men told me is my sister shared a story with me, my wife shared a story with me, my mother shared a story with me, and I had no idea this was still a thing. I had no idea that these things were happening to other women that I care about. And that's not okay. So
Right.
it brings a lot of men into the conversation. Unfortunately, it also is very polarizing,
Yes.
that they withdraw from the conversation too, because it's like, oh, I can't say anything, can't do anything right. Like
Well, yes. And that's one of the, I think, one of the many troubling things that has, been identified is, not every person is Harry Weinstein or
right.
Anthony Weiner.
Right.
And I have personally worked with men. There's this one fella in particular that comes to mind every time, a lovely man. He was about 60, solo practitioner in his own law firm. And he shared with me when we were working, a couple years ago, that as a commercial litigator or a corporate litigator, he really struggled with dealing with female opposing counsel, because when they were coming after him
Mm-hmm.
advocating for their clients, her clients, he had a very difficult time responding in kind, giving the societal norms that he was reared with back
Right.
in the 40s, 50s, of being chivalrous and deferential to women. And so he felt, he had some real rumblings, if, as Brene Brown would say, she had around the fact of, coming back as strongly as he would with a male opposing counsel.
Yeah.
So I use that. So I ended up giving him a book to read by someone who I have tremendous respect for, Barbara Proctor, who is an
Mm-hmm.
internationally known business communications trainer. She wrote a book that I love, The Power of Positive Confrontation.
Ooh.
It's fabulous. And anything she's published, I think she's published 12 books or so, is fabulous, very, very actionable. But I raise that example because men, as much as women, but for very different reasons, need to have resources, training, or some type of internal resources that they can understand or be taught or brought awareness around what is now the new norm and what is okay and what isn't.
Yep. Yeah, yeah, exactly. We are developing a new norm. And I think if you can point to recent headlines of Joe Biden, and I'm not going to get
Yeah.
political by any means,
Yeah.
but you can see how we're reshaping of, hey, 50 years ago, being chivalrous, treating women differently was the standard. Entering people's personal space obviously wasn't questioned either. Now it's a new normal. And so what does that look like? And I think a big question I get from people is like, really, do we have to educate men how to treat us? Well, unfortunately, for so long, uh, the behavior wasn't appropriate. And so they really are relearning, basic social norms, the things that we learned in fourth grade about being respectful and touching people who don't want to be touched. I mean, we learned this at a young age.
Right.
Somehow, though, in the corporate world, we let shenanigans happen and
Right.
those boundaries got crossed. And so it's redefining those boundaries. So I think at the end of this, it's going to be such a positive thing. But you're right. We are in a rumble area right now.
Um, and it is, and so there's a lot of uncertainty, which I think leads us to the place for women, since we are the majority who are violated or not treated in a comfortable way. It's incumbent upon us to set the boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think at this point, you're right.
Because it's not, I mean, I participated as a speaker at a program, women legal conference back in February, and where this was these type of topics around implicit bias and institutional gender discrimination and the inequality and the gender pay gap. All these things were spoken about very broadly on an institutional level, but just like, running our country, I mean, it comes down to every individual is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
we're all a part of the system.
we have to take, action. We have to take steps to get ourselves and being mindful of our own level of involvement, integration, comfort level, because, it's very difficult to perform, to have what we would call peak performance if we are, being harassed every day.
Right. Right.
So, we would rather just, not go into work because we know that big bullies are right across the hallway.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it is our opportunity to educate folks and help them understand. At which point we've done that, then and there's still bad behavior, then that's a candid conversation, like you said. I had this surface last week. I was with an industry that's 8% women, eight single.
oh Lord,
So really male dominated, although I
yeah,
would argue most industries are.
yes,
And she's like, I really, this is exhausting. I don't want to have to like tell my manager what's not okay.
yeah,
And I said, okay, here's the thing. If we want to like pretend, but let's just pretend that he's not aware of the behavior and perhaps it's unintentional. Usually both of those things are true, not always, but usually. What would that look like to help him understand, help him see what he's not seeing? And are you okay with that behavior continuing?
yeah,
Because if you are, don't say anything. That's
right.
fine. But if you aren't okay with that behavior continuing, and more importantly, as women, we're much better at negotiating on other people's behalves. If
Mm,
you're okay with it happening to other women, definitely don't say anything. But
right,
if you're not okay with that, this is your choice. Your choice is to lean in and have a candid conversation with this person and assume that on the other side of it, they will become aware and that they will practice better intent in their behavior. I usually see 80% of the time it works out positively. I rarely hear about those candid conversations backfiring. And that's where we're at. We really are at a place where candor and challenging and education is so needed at the same exact time when people are retreating from that type of candor and not wanting to say or do the wrong thing. So it's like there's this opportunity, but then there's this fear. And so it's finding a way to have safe, uncomfortable conversations.
right. Well, and that takes me to one of my areas of passion, and that's the confidence gap within women.
Mhm.
Because perhaps based in one instance, because of it's all about fear, or much of it's about fear of retribution, fear of not being promoted, fear of being treated
Mhm.
differently, fear of being left out, etc., etc. So that goes back to the confidence issue of putting those boundaries. And so as a certified unconscious bias trainer, how do you explain your firm's methodology on how to deal with these type of issues from an educational as a practical matter?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, be aware of your bias. The research at Harvard has been around for decades, and what they have found is that everyone that is assessed in their system, and by the way, it's free, so check it out, Implicit Bias at Harvard. And everyone that's assessed has some level of bias in one of the categories. So the two most popular are the diversity variables we can see, gender, race, or usually see, I should say. We can't always. There's also one in sexual orientation, disabilities, age, and actual overweightness as well. So if you're interested, get aware. Get aware first. I'm as a certified trainer, I've tested or assessed myself in all those areas. It's very eye-opening because, again, everyone has bias, and sometimes it leans an opposite way than the rest of the population, or sometimes it's very aligned. So as you might suspect, most people have racial bias. Most people associate white with power and Black with oppression, for example. I have a slight bias towards that myself. On the gender side, though, mine's flipped from the average population. I actually have associate men with family and women with careers, because I spend a lot of time, like you do, with women, professional women. And I'm not saying that's right. There's no right or wrong to this. It's just I'm aware, because what ends up happening, and I notice this showing up for me, I feel very comfortable with professional women. When I'm talking with women that are stay-at-home parents that perhaps do a lot more work in home and not in the corporate setting, my bias kind of shows up like, really? Like, okay, I want us all to like be at work, and that's not right. That's not right either, And so we all have bias. Being aware of it, step one. And then the second piece I would offer is manage it. So if you have it, just like I just articulated, I do, I need to be managing that and making sure my behavior is not aligned with that bias. So these are interventions that I talk about in our workshops, is diving into, in the moment when I'm thinking this, right before I'm about to say this or do this, check myself. How do I know that's true about that person? And because of my limitations and how I have surrounded myself with people that look like me, that think like me, just like we all do, that is going to show up in settings where things are different. So in different culturally diverse settings, for example, when I'm with the majority of people of color, even women of color, sometimes I feel like, oh, I'm different here, right? So I got to make sure to check myself in that situation, make sure that I don't say or do something that would be different than how I would treat others. And this is, when you can get good at this takes a lot of practice, because you're rewiring your brain. Our brains are wired for pattern recognition and assumptions. If you say don't make assumptions, you probably already made an assumption before you finish saying that. So it's just how we work. And I think that's so freeing for people, like, whew, okay, I don't have to be perfect. No, there is no perfect ally. There is no perfect champion of diversity in the workplace. We're all going to step out of bounds and do something wrong. It's not perfect all the time. But it's recognizing it and sometimes stopping yourself right before you're going to do it, and really being hyper aware of it. And then it actually becomes much more fluid and natural. So I find myself having to do the interventions much less often now. But I was certified over a year ago, and that has been a journey.
I'm sure you, but for those individuals, just your typical Jane Doe who's going into work, she's been promoted up through the ranks. She may have management responsibilities. I mean, most people don't have training. You tell me, most organizations don't have training, right?
Well, especially in diversity and inclusion. I mean, you're lucky enough if you get some leadership training thrown at you. But usually diversity and inclusion, I think we're sitting at, 20% of organizations are doing training. And the most popular one is unconscious bias, which always cracks me up. It's like, really? That's the place you're going to choose to tell people that they're biased?
Right.
Might want to start somewhere, build some trust and comfort around the issue before we go there.
Right. That's it, because I'm sure it's a very, very uncomfortable place to start.
Well, it's a hot topic. People I get this. It's a hot topic. We want to be providing those tools for our managers, and we want to eliminate hiring bias so we can recruit diverse talent. That's a big one right now. Well, okay, so let me So you're going to tell them they're biased when they're trying to hire diverse people. So they're probably going to go in thinking, I have to hire diverse people to show them I'm not biased. Then what happens when they come to work?
Right.
Are
Oh,
they going to want to stay?
right. They kind of, well, I've seen that they, when I was in the house at corporate and mostly law firms, it was predictable that the good ones always left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They left because they understood, that maybe they, obviously just like getting married, you really don't know someone to, or, get together until
Mm-hmm.
you live with somebody on a day-to-day basis. But,
Yeah.
same thing with corporate marriages. So it is, it's very volatile, but, and it, dealing with all the personal baggage that comes along with that, and a lifetime of thinking in a certain way,
Mm-hmm.
and being willing to think differently and to be open to change.
Yeah. Well, and diversity and inclusion go hand in hand. That's why the titles in corporate America are such. And now we're starting to see diversity, equality, and inclusion. I really like the term equality because it's less polarizing too. But yeah, you have to have both. You can't just say, hey, we're going to get different people to come in here and they're going to want to stay just because this is awesome. No, the culture is going to have to shift. And cultural shifts take time. And how do you embed inclusiveness as something we hold our leadership team accountable to? We know the behaviors that are acceptable here and not acceptable here. I mean, that's when you have to get really super specific with what good looks like so that people can, again, relearn these
Right,
new norms.
right. That's a heavy lift. That's a heavy lift, but required nonetheless. So one of the things, Julie, that really fascinates me about your background and the work that you've done, of the two books that you've published, and my hat goes off to you on that one. I published one about a year and a half ago, and so I personally lived the hell that is to bringing it all together. I mean, I love to talk. If it was only about writing, that'd be one thing, but so many other things that are incorporated into publishing a book. But the one title that really is fascinating to me, interestingly enough, is entitled One, How Male Allies Support Women for Gender Equality, that you include men in the conversation. I would love to understand more about your philosophy in doing so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I, like you, was speaking at a lot of women's conferences and doing a lot of women's speaking inside organizations. And a couple years ago, I started to see men coming into the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were there before. They started to really show up in a way that I hadn't seen before. And I was like, hey, this is a women's conference. What are you doing here? Hey, you know that you're different than everybody else, right? And I'm joking. I didn't really say it that way, but I was curious. And so I
Sure.
would just ask him, like, what's going on? Like, why, what do you think about this? And I started getting all these amazing stories from these men saying, I've been personally affected by this. I don't think it's right what's going on right now. I have to be a part of the solution. I have a daughter, and that's kind of a sticky one for a lot of women. Like, really, you have a daughter, so now you care. But I think it's a place to meet a man where he's at in the journey.
Mm-hmm.
Research shows your firstborn's a daughter, you're 50% more likely to support gender equality. Like, I don't care what your reason is, as long as you're here and you're supportive, like, bring it on.
Right.
So I'm not here to qualify allies. Anyone can be an ally. It's a choice, and it's a choice every day. And so that really began my curiosity for interviewing, kind of coming up with some key themes of what does it take to be an ally? How do we engage men as allies from a female perspective? So that's why we wrote the book. It really was where the conversation was starting to go a couple years ago. And now, I mean, it was just on one of the morning shows this week, men as allies. I'm like, wow, it's so cool that's where we're at,
That's
you
wonderful.
know? And I'm so thankful I had the foresight to see it because I didn't know what to call these men. I was calling them man champions, which is just, I know it was bad. I always joke like, I know it was bad, but I didn't know what to call them. And
Sure.
so allies, I think is a good signal side by side. No
Mm-hmm.
one has power over anybody. Like, we truly are in it together. And so that fast forward to now, our work is leading like an ally. So what does it mean to be an inclusive leader, male or female? Like, what are the behaviors you can take on across the gender spectrum to really engage diverse talent and make sure that women's voices are heard, that women are seen inside organizations? There are little strikes, like these biases that happen in the workplace that tend to happen much more so to women. And I think raising awareness to men of like, oh, that's a thing. I thought we were over this. Okay, it's a thing. So, okay, I can do something about it. So equipping them with the tools, teaching them how to be an ally. And it is a daily journey. And so that's where I think the conversation's going is like, great. There's awareness. Maybe I want to lean in, don't know how. So tell me something I can do. Tell me a question I can ask my team, or, tell me a subject I could have at my next team meeting. I get questions like that. So giving people that content is now where the conversation's going, like peppering in kind of this everyday lead like an ally behaviors as a toolkit for today's middle manager that doesn't get a lot of resources.
Sure. That's fascinating. Oh, and have you taken it to market, I assume?
So it is in book form right now. So we are finalizing the manuscript. It will be on bookshelves by the end of the year. So we have a publisher that's committed to getting it out for the holidays. So I'm excited. Again, 2020, right? 2020 is such an important year for women. And I think just to celebrate inclusively across all aspects of diversity of, hey, this is a significant accomplishment. What have we learned? Where's the conversation going? And how can we speed it up a little bit in the future?
Right. Well, I think about all the organizations that don't have the training, and they're so stuck in the status quo, which is not really status quo.
I know.
I mean, in my world, in professional services, if you're not moving forward, you're moving backwards. There is no status quo. Yep. Whether or not you choose to believe that and you want to take your head out of the sand is a whole different question. But and being as you are, as a trainer, a leader, leadership trainer, and business development trainer, and seeing how so many firms are resistant to change from a corporate culture. I can only imagine. It doesn't seem to me that it's needed. Every organization needs it. Where the buy-in will come in will be an interesting point of entry, I think.
Yeah. And people ask me, probably another one of the most common questions I get is what organizations are getting this right? To your point, the change is hard. Cultural barriers take time to remove. And I just have so few examples. People tell me ones, and I've seen rumblings of ones. Salesforce here in the Midwest is headquartered in San Francisco. Great example of they're saying the right things, but are they really mirroring that with their leadership team positions? They still got some work to do. Another one, Accenture, gets a lot of credit for diversity and inclusion. And when I've talked to folks there, oddly enough, they're like, oh, this is just normal. There's this almost like we've arrived here. And so we have an embedded culture. I can't even describe why it's different, because people want to work here so they don't leave. And so they just take that culture to be normal. And that's the rub. I think that's really what's hard to make cultural shift happen where it really needs to. The culture is so drastically different that it's like you can't just flip a switch.
Right.
And then the ones that are getting it are so embedded, which is great. That shows you've gotten there, that they don't even know how to teach other cultures to do it. So this is where it's kind of having that unbiased lens as a speaker and trainer and facilitator to help put, kind of be the Wizard of Oz and kind of figure out what's going on behind. Yeah.
And it takes courage. It takes institutional courage to start down this road. Because in the work that we've done with many, many firms in the areas around business and professional development, it's never an isolated issue. In our world, and this is not culture. Well, it is culture. It's not around gender equality and diversity inclusion, but around the business development, it goes right to the heart of the compensation system. And it probably doesn't get any harder than that.
Well, and and that's where Salesforce took it, right? Pay equality gap and solving that. And they have to continuously audit and continue to find things. So that's a systemic problem that I would argue bias is the root cause of that. So they haven't eliminated the bias. Therefore, they still have the systemic problem.
Right.
The same goes for many other parts of the employee experience. The one attribute I would point to, especially for women, what we know to be true, especially for women of color, is promotions.
Yes.
Measure who's getting promoted in your organization. Those are the behaviors that are being rewarded. Those are the types of people that we're signaling to everyone else, be like them. Yeah. And guess what? It is usually straight Caucasian males. And if you're measuring it and you're bold enough and have courage, like you said, to be transparent about that data and to share it with your leaders and have them share it with their teams, things change pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I mean, if you're floating around an 80% number, which by the way is pretty common,
Mhm.
that's pretty glaringly obvious that things aren't equal here.
Right.
And, you can say we have a meritocracy, they worked harder. No,
Mhm.
it's bias. And I'm not saying that, there's different performances, but I have yet to see performance data on people of color or women don't work as hard. Like
Oh, for goodness sake, yeah.
it doesn't exist, that data. So that's not happening all the time if you're floating at a high number like that.
That high number, of course, of course. So, I would want to know from your unique perspective, what are a few practical steps that women can take to effectively navigate some of these biases in the workplace? Because we know that they're there; they've always been there. We talked about earlier about the boundaries, but there are plenty of women in the workplace, unlike you and I, who who just accept this is just
Mhm.
the way it is.
Yep. Oh yeah, I hear that every day. Oh, you don't understand, Julie. You don't work here every day. Yep. It'll just go back to normal tomorrow. Yep. That kind of complacency. I think we run into that a lot, my corporate clients especially, and that's why I'm getting away from this one-time training stuff. You really have to have a series of intentional events to really get to the root cause of what it takes to change. But I would say for a woman leader that's listening today, any woman, in fact, have a plan. Have a game plan. So the very first body of work that we uncovered is that women with a plan win, 80% higher success rate associated with having a plan versus not. Your male counterparts are much more likely to have a plan, meaning goals, meaning here's what job I want next, and asking for that job. Women fear self-promotion. So back to your confidence part, get comfortable asking for things.
Right.
And even if it's like only going to benefit yourself, I would challenge that. That probably will benefit your family. That
Yeah.
will probably benefit other people in your life that you care about. It's going to benefit the organization if they know what you want. So don't make it about you then.
Right.
So have a plan. You speak up, ask for it, and engage your allies. So if you don't have a mentor, which by the way, men are significantly much more likely to have allies and mentors, develop strategic relationships.
Right.
Find the future version of yourself. So once you've defined your plan, where you want to go, find somebody that's already doing that.
Mhm.
Engage them as an ally. It doesn't have to be a woman. I would think it's actually better if it's somebody that's not like you. You're going to get a diverse perspective. So challenge, some of these norms, some of these biases that we even hold ourselves to, and go beyond our comfort zone.
Yeah.
But yeah, speak up. The confidence piece, the allies piece, the planning piece are huge.
Well, and that's interesting because from an institutional perspective of going outside the comfort zone, asking for what you want, the second kind of shoe of that is you've got to be in a place where you're okay if it doesn't, if the outcome is not what you want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, and there's a
Yeah. And
lot
that's
of
disappointment.
unpredictability.
Ask yourself the question, what's the worst that could happen?
Right.
Men are like, to be like, well, what's the worst gonna happen? I'm just gonna ask for it. Like, and they like no hard feelings. Like 2 minutes later, they're fine. Women, we're ruminating. Oh gosh, they don't like me. I've done it. I know. I mean, and like, it's not about me. People just aren't thinking about you that much. You're not that important.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's so, you're so spot on. And I say when women not like you and I, because, I think the first 3 years I was out of college and working in professional jobs, or maybe the first 5 years working in professional positions, I was laid off 3 times,
Mm.
and none of which were performance based. And I just recently heard, I don't remember who said this, but somebody, I don't know if it was Steve Jobs, somebody said, as a young person, um, don't be afraid to get laid off, get it done as quickly as possible so you can get over the what's the worst thing that can happen, right?
Yeah, fail fast, learn
Yeah.
from it. Yeah, and then the whole what's the worst could happen? Like, remember that time? That was pretty bad. It's not going to be that bad this time.
Right. And so I was 6 months into my first position out of college, and I was laid off.
Ugh.
Actually, they actually eliminated the position, which was a whole nother story into itself. But 6 months, I was like 23 years old, and and so it kind of toughened me up
Yep.
for the next two that were to come. Were to come.
Yeah.
but but hey, you survive. There's skills. If you pay attention, there's a lot that you can learn from failing
Mhm.
fast and furious. And so now
Yeah.
I can't really fire myself. I can,
You're
but I choose
protecting
not to.
yourself from that. Yeah, I agree. I had lots of pivot points in my career. Some I wanted, some I didn't. And I have to say, I think those helped me. They helped me be more resilient,
Yes,
less risk averse.
yes.
Women tend to fear risk more so than our male counterparts. That's why we balance each other out. And so I agree with you. I mean, finding safe ways to fail. And if you do that, kind of set a goal for yourself, a challenge, every week or every month, I'm going to stretch myself and put myself in a position that feels uncomfortable and it might not go well. The more you do that, the better you get at it. And then it just becomes like this muscle and this behavior that I naturally do.
And that is, just like anything else, I have the on my vision board everything we want's on the other side of fear.
Yep.
So if one by one we eliminate those fears, I mean, like you say, find a safe place to fail, then there's a lot of growth that can come from that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that mantra because it is fear. We're in our own
Oh
way.
gosh, I mean, I just published an article. I guess it was, I think I was at the end of the year, the beginning of the year, is entitled "Fearless and Free."
Mhm.
Because when I started doing a personal examination of what am I afraid of, and I really can't say anything that I'm afraid of anymore.
That's great.
Now, of course, I mean, I'm not 23 or 43, but I mean, so there's some life experience there, but it's a very liberating place to be.
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
I would want for my stepchildren. I have a stepdaughter who's just beginning her legal career,
Mhm.
and other young people not to have to go the same path and until they're in midlife to be fearless and free
And then
because
you realize, like, I had this power all along.
well that's the good witch Glinda. You had this power all along,
Right,
you just
right,
didn't know it, which is
right.
one of my driving passions,
Mhm.
of showing, empowering women to show that they have the power.
Yep.
If you just if you know where to look for it internally. So let me ask you, speaking to the disruption that we spoke about earlier happening across industries as gender and racial diversity are taking a foothold, how is it that this should represent some eye-opening mindsets to the bottom line across all business sectors?
Yeah, I mean, the best research on this is from McKinsey and Company. They do an annual Women Matter report and diversity reports, and they continuously find a much higher profitability rate
Mm,
associated with diversity at the top of your organization compared to your industry peers. So it is an apples to apples comparison. The latest one was 21% higher with women. With male counterparts at the top doesn't mean all women
sure.
means equal. um, and so I think that kind of overcomes the zero sum game. When we're working together, there's more seats at the table. It's not about a male seat versus a female seat. And then, Harvard continuously publishes data on the behaviors of inclusive teams and diverse teams, better ideas, better decisions, better profits, better business results. There's a huge correlation between all of those things. So there's a business case. The sad thing is we've known about this business case for quite some time. This data has been available and it hasn't compelled real change. So I'm a firm believer you got to have the data to back it up, but more importantly, you have to have the human case for it. This is what's right for humans, and people inside the organization need to hear from leadership, all leaders, why this is important for the organization. We all have to be singing from the same song sheet, and it has to be genuine, it has to be real.
So powerful. And it's like there's just this gap. I mean, it's this
Mhm.
gap of kind of the haves and the have-nots of understanding and the level of awareness
Yep.
of how it's impacting, positively or adversely to the bottom line.
I agree with you. I agree. And it's hard to unsee your own privilege, right? I've got privilege in
Yeah,
certain areas. I have a lack of privilege in others.
yeah,
And for white males in our country, they've had privilege for a long time. And this doesn't mean they have to get rid of it. No, it's not their fault that they have it, but you do need to be aware of it.
exactly, exactly. Oh, that is just so fascinating. Thank you for bringing your expertise on that. It's just really very chilling to to hear from you about your field's experience and your research and where we are, and really the imperative that it's changing, right? Whether you get on the train or not, it's changing.
Yep. It might leave the station without you. Get
Right?
on board.
Get on board. Because I think, what is it, by 2040, Caucasians will now be a minority.
Yep. Yeah, from a racial diversity, there's a burning platform, and companies are really slow to jump on. Your customer base is changing. If you don't resemble your customers internally, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue. From
Yes.
a gender perspective, I mean, we're more than half the population.
Right.
45% of the workforce.
Oh,
And most of the consumer base, right? 80% of most buying decisions are made by women. So again, you're not reflecting your customers if you look
right.
different. So there's going to become a time when I think companies become the haves and have-nots based on this inaction or action.
Exactly. Well, this is all very fascinating. So I want to, I ask all of our guests this one question because to me it's just a very fun question. If you could give your younger self one piece of professional advice, knowing now all that you know, what do you think that would be?
I mean, back to what I said, have a plan, ask
Yeah.
for it, engage allies. I was fortunate to have some mentors early in my career, but I certainly didn't speak up and ask for things that I should have asked for. And my male counterparts were negotiating at a much higher rate, which created a pay gap right off the get-go in my corporate career. Had I stayed in corporate, that 5% would have compounded over the years. So
Sure.
it was a big miss. And this speaks to, we need to educate college students about this, college age women, starting
Yeah.
to universities, educate them to negotiate and have a plan. So know where you want to go. I was always waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder and be like, hey, Julie, what about this job? What about this promotion? No, that's not the way it works. Just,
Yeah.
have a plan. I want to go into marketing and I would like to be there next year. Is that doable? Yes, no. Okay. Help me.
Right. Right. Well,
So,
I always say, I say this to mostly the younger folks that I work with in coaching and training situations, is that number one, no one's ever going to offer you anything. You have to ask. If the answer is no, it's usually not no, but not now. And if it is no, then they're doing you a favor of letting you know what that reality is for that situation. And then you can make an informed decision based on that, whether you're going to go out and up or you're going to retool your school skill set and do something differently. But having a plan, having a vision, and not just drifting along like too many people do, particularly women, because they don't realize that they have options.
yeah, I agree. And we're kind of gender socialized that way. I mean, the root cause of this is how we raise boys and girls in this country,
Yes.
to please others, to not speak up, to not rock the boat. These types of things we just don't tell boys. And so when you enter a workforce that's male dominated with male behavior, then you have to relearn gender norms. It becomes problematic.
Very problematic. So this has been an extremely fascinating and uplifting conversation that we've had today, Julie. I so appreciate you joining us here on Secret Sauce Marketing Tastings podcast. And I want to give our listeners an opportunity to connect with you. And so what is the easiest direct path of that connection?
Yeah, well, we're just relaunched our website, nextpivotpoint.com. I'd love for you to go there. There is a plethora of resources. There's a resources page that has our podcasts. You can subscribe and download them there. Blogs, videos, workbooks, you name it. We've got everything there. So check it out, nextpivotpoint.com. And that's actually our social handle as well. So we're on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. I post daily on LinkedIn. So check us out, Julie Kratz, Kratz. So follow me there, and you can engage and kind of get a flavor for this message and be in the know on a daily basis, because we need to small education steps along this way. It's a journey, not a destination.
Well, gosh, a woman after my own heart. A journey versus a destination. I probably say that 10 times a day because it is. I mean, these are huge issues and they're not going to be solved overnight. But we as individuals, as individual women in the workplace, women professionals, and women, period, we have choices, and we all need to uplift and empower one another wherever we are in our station in life. And so, I thank you so much for joining us on the Secret Sauce Marketing Hastings podcast, and this relates to marketing as far as creating a more profitable, prosperous business by addressing all these issues. So there is a lot of tie-in there. And so thank you, audience and listeners, for joining us again. You can certainly listen and find more of our podcast on Apple, iTunes, of course, klamarketing.com for all types of resources, videos, blog posts, podcasts, additional episodes. We want to be that resource for uplifting and empowering men and women and in your professional and business development endeavors. And so thank you again, Julie, and we look forward to engaging in again sometime in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.